Welcome to Gemara Markings. Today's shiur is Kesubos Daf Beis. Don't forget to click on the Daf option in order to view a marked Daf Gemara for today's shiur. If you are not fully familiar with our Gemara marking system and wish to benefit from its great rewards, it is essential that you study all of the introductory material accessed by clicking on the Learn the System option provided on the sidebar of our homepage, and then go to option 2. If you are already partially familiar, you will benefit by clicking on the brief formatted introduction that is available here. Being that our system is a visual approach to the Daf Gemara, it is recommended that you print out the marked Daf Gemara before the shiur. If you wish to be in touch with us, we can be reached at gmarkings@gmail.com. With the beginning of a new Masechta, just a very brief word of introduction. The word ksuba, in the plural ksubos, is the reference to a document that is written out. Ksuba means from the word kosav, to write something. It's a document that essentially provides financial guarantees for a woman who is getting married upon the divorce or the death of her husband. There are many details associated with this particular document. As of course we can see, we have an entire Masechta that deals with the obligations that a man has towards his wife, and also obligations that a wife has towards her husband. The details, of course, will be the subject of our Masechta. Another point of information that will be helpful in order to appreciate our Mishnah is that as far as halacha is concerned, there are really two stages in establishing a marriage. There is something called erusin, which is followed by something called nisuin. Erusin is also referred to by the term kiddushin. They're, for our purposes, interchangeable expressions. There is a tractate, the last one of this order, of Seder Noshim, which is known as Maseches Kiddushin. Kiddushin, or erusin, is the first stage in establishing a marriage. That's where a man offers something of value, we'll say money, or money equivalent, to a woman. There are actually other methods. There's shtar and bia also, but we'll focus right now on kesef. He offers her money, and in exchange for the money that she receives, she agrees to marry the man. At that point, she is called an arusa, and she is, technically speaking, married to this man. She is certainly forbidden to all other men. As far as her husband is concerned, she is not allowed to cohabit with him, to be in intimacy with him, until the second stage, that is nisuin. What nisuin is, that involves standing under a canopy, for example, and there are actually other methods that are discussed in the halacha of how to establish nisuin, but it's the second stage. Nowadays, we don't find any separation in time, namely we do the erusin and the nisuin at our standard marriage ceremony. There's no gap in time between the two, so we don't have a situation where a woman is considered an arusa without also being a nisua. However, in the time of the Gemara, and we'll see that brought up in our Mishnah, there was a situation where there could actually be up to a year gap between the erusin and the nisuin, so that you can have a woman who is walking around, who is technically speaking married to a man, and that man, her husband, has not yet cohabited with her because of this gap in time. You'll ask, why is there any necessity for a gap in time? The answer to that is that there was a need to, let's say, get funds together, to get wherewithal together on the part of the couple in order to establish a household. So the time between the erusin and the nisuin, they were involved in getting in setting up house. Without any further ado, let us glance at the side of our Gemara. You'll notice the nosei appears in the margin. The nosei is our topic heading. And we have written Kvias Yom Dalid Liyom Nisue Basulos. The establishment of Wednesday as the day for the Basulos. These are women that have never been married before, to consummate their marriage in Nisuin. Essentially, the Nisuin is the couple stands under a marriage canopy, and shortly thereafter they have intimacy with one another. The Mishnah indicates that Wednesday was the day chosen for Nisuin. And as we said in our introduction, the Nisuin is the second stage after the Erusin had already been done. And when you're dealing with a Basula, a girl that had not been married before, this Nisuin could be taking place up till a year after she had entered matrimony through Kiddushin or Erusin. That's, of course, the money that the husband gave her in exchange for her acquiescing to marry him. The Mishnah. Basula niseis liyom horavi. The virgin marries on Wednesday. Ve'almona liyom hachamishi. And a widow who is now remarrying, the assigned day of the week for her marrying is a Thursday. Of course, this will be discussed in the Gemara. How did the Chazal come up with these particular days of the week? The Mishnah goes on to explain regarding a Basula, Shepa'amayim b'Shabbos bote dinim yoshvin bayoros b'yom hasheni v'yom hachamishi. Twice a week, from the time of Ezra, who was the leader of the Jewish people at the beginning of the second temple period, he established that courts shall sit in session on Mondays and Thursdays. Being that the courts sit in session on Thursdays, we have the couple marry and have intimacy on Wednesday. Shimhoyo loy tainas besulim. If the husband feels that the wife that he is now marrying and consummating his marriage with, if he has any claim that she had been with another man after their erusin, hoyomashkim lebezin, he would run. He would get up early. Mashkim is to get up early. He would hasten to Beis Din the next day, so that he gets married on Wednesday. If he discovers that she had been with another man in the course of their intimacy, he would then run to Beis Din with his claim on Thursday, the very next morning. If we take a look in Rashi, B'Sheni v'Chamishi, 3 lines from the top. Achas me'eser takonos shetikin Ezra bo v'kama. This is one of 10 rulings that Ezra established in Maseches bo v'kama, the Perek Meruba in the 7th Perek of bo v'kama. Meforish l'kulu, everything is spelled out there. U'lekach tiknu shetinosei b'ravi. And with this in mind, the rabbis established that consummation of marriage should take place on a Wednesday. Shimhoyo lo tainas besulim. If the husband, in the course of his initial intimacy with her, discovers that she was in fact not a basula, yashkim lebeisin va'od kaso olav. He will get up the very next morning while he's still angry. Ve'im yesh sheus bein time, if there were a gap in time, yesh lochush, we are concerned, we would worry, shemo yispayes v'tiskarer daito, that this husband might be appeased and calmed if, let us say, they had the intimacy on Tuesday or on Monday, and the court is going to sit in session on Thursday, so by the time their 2 days lapses from his intimacy with her on Tuesday and the arrival of Thursday, he might calm down from his discovery that she was not a basula. And Vishemo he's in tachtov. There's a fear that the reason for her not being a virgin like he had thought she was very simply because she had intimacy with another man prior to this couple's marriage, and that intimacy may have taken place after she became an arusa. V'nesrolov, and if that had been the case, she would be forbidden to her actual husband. Kiralfinon, from the way we derive this in the Gemara Masechah Sota, Mi v'nistra v'hi nitma, that's a pasuk in the Torah. When we talk shiyavo lebeis din yizbarer hadavar k'shiyetze hakoil shem yavo edim, when the couple were to come to Beis Din, the husband's claim that he felt she was not a virgin, word would get out that he's making such a claim. Witnesses might hear of this and actually be aware of her having been promiscuous with another man. The Gemara will ask if the whole concern is this: the husband's hastening to court. And you tell me that the court sits in session on Mondays as well, could marriages not have taken place on a Sunday with the same scenario taken care of? So now we continue with the Gemara, but before we do so, we will encounter a new geometric form. The triangle appears, and under our Mivneh heading, the structural note on the side of the Gemara, we explain that the triangle introduces Shnei Lishoinois B'divrei Shmuel, two versions as to what Shmuel says. So you can see we have Roman numeral number 1 at the beginning of the Gemara, and a number of lines later there is a Roman numeral number 2, and you'll notice we have a squiggle underline, Elo itmar hochi itmar. That squiggle underline is often used in Gemara markings to introduce an alternative stance or alternative version of whatever. So now the Gemara. Omar Rav Yosef, Omar Rav Yehuda, Omar Shmuel. Mipnei ma omru. Why was it established b'sulu nises liyom horavi, that the virgin girls consummate their marriage on Wednesdays? The answer, Lefi Shishoninu. Now, let us make it clear that we're going to be reading what appears to be an answer over the next couple lines, but it's not going to be such smooth sailing. There's some very obvious questions that one might want to ask. The Gemara will be redoing what we're going to see now in a more logical, clear fashion later on. So initially we're going to translate the Gemara in the hopes of being able to appreciate the restructuring of the Gemara later as it unfolds. So in the meantime, the question was asked, why was Wednesday chosen for the day of consummating marriages? Lefi Shishoninu, we have learned a Tanaic source that says, Higias man v'lo nisu. If the deadline came, we mentioned before that we give a couple a year in which to get their finances together, their funding together in order to set up a house. Now, if that year mark since the Erusin has lapsed, v'lo nisu, and they still have not consummated their marriage, oichlois mishalo, the husband is at this point now obligated to support his wife, to provide food for her. And if the husband is a kohen, the oichlois betruma, she is entitled to eat from truma, which is a tithe given from one's produce, given to kohanim, and only kohanim can eat from it, and of course the kohen's household. So this is a Tanaic source which serves as a backdrop. Be aware that if a year passes between the initial marriage and the nisuin, the husband is obligated to start supporting her, even if he hasn't yet consummated the marriage. Could it be that if, let us say, the year ends on a Sunday, will he be obligated to support her? Therefore, our Mishnah teaches Besula Nises Yom Oravi, that Wednesday is the assigned time for Besulos to consummate their marriages, to enter Nisuin. And therefore, we learn that if the year ends, the actual calendar year ends on a Sunday, he is not yet obligated to support her. That will set in only by Wednesday. Omar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef, by the way, he is the one that introduced this particular section of Gemara. That's Rav Yosef quoting his rabbi, Rav Yehuda, in turn quoted Shmuel. But now Rav Yosef on his own, he hears this give and take, and he says, or he hears this explanation, and he said it, and he now reacts to it. Moreh de Avram. Moreh de Avram is an expression. It's a type of expression of exasperation, of swearing. Toli Tanya b'dalo Tanya. Do we say that a Tanaic source, our Mishnah, is dependent on something that is not found in Mishnayos? What do you mean? Hey Tanya v'hei lo Tanya, which is a source and which is not a source? Ha Tanya v'ha Tanya. Both Besula Nises v'yom Ravi is a Mishnah, and the Higia Zman v'lo Nisu Ochos Mishalo is also a Tanaic source. So how could Rav Yosef say that we're making a Tanaic source dependent on a non-source? Elo, rather, what did Rav Yosef mean when he expressed his wonderment? Toli Tanya de Meforesh Taima. We're making a Mishnah that spells out a reason, and we're making it dependent on B'detanya de lo Meforesh Taima, on a source that doesn't spell out its reason. In other words, our Mishnah, if you were to ask why do Basulos get married on Wednesday, the Mishnah spelled out because the Beis Din sits on the very next day and will be available to process, to hear a case of a husband who claims that she is not a Basula. So it's convenient to have the marriage take place on Wednesday. Not just convenient, but it's necessary for the marriage to take place on Wednesday, so there's no cooling off time between the consummation of the marriage and the court session. So what Rav Yosef is bothered by is that you're making a Mishnah that spells out its reason and explaining it based on a Mishnah that doesn't spell out any reasons. If we take a look at Rashi, a number of lines down, Ela Toli Tanya de Meforish Taima, but the Tanya de Lo Meforish Taima, Mishnah Seinu Taima Mefurish Besocha. Our Mishnah has the reason built into it, which, and quote, Kidei Shiashkim Lebeis Din, so that he'll get up early the next morning while he's still heated up about it and take his case to Beis Din. V'Giyazman, the source that speaks about the passage of a year, and the husband obligated to support her, ain't shum tam befurish ba. There's no reason built into that source lomar in order for us to say b'nei ma im higiyazman be'echad b'Shabbos eino male lo mezonos. Why is it that if the year ends on a Sunday, so he's not obligated to feed her? That's not spelled out in the source. Therefore, there's something that's not smooth about this Gemara. There's something not smooth about Shmuel's initial question followed by the answer. Shmuel raised the question of why is Besula Niseis L'Yom Revi, and then a response concerning the passage of a year and obligation to support comes as an answer. L'chaora, the Mishnah explains why the Besula is Niseis L'Yom Revi. Why is there any necessity to resort to some other source that doesn't have any reasons built into it? Ela, I itmar, hachi itmar. Therefore, if anything was said, and notice we have a long marking, where this is all Rav Yosef speaking, all throughout this long marking. Rather, if anything was said, the following was said, says Rav Yosef, Omer Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Mipnei ma omru besula niseis liyom horavi. Why is it that the sulos consummate their marriages on Wednesdays? And this is what the Mishnah said. Shim hoyolo tainas besula mashkim lebeis. If he had any claim of her not being a besula, not turning out to be something other than she purported to be, so he can then go the very next morning while he's still heated up about it and take his case to Beis Din. You might ask, says Rav Yosef, the tinose bechod b'Shabbos, let the nisuin take place on a Sunday. Shim hoyolo tainis b'silo hoyamashkin leBeis Din. If he had any claims concerning her that he feels she is not a virgin as she purported to be, he could then run to Beis Din on the very next day, on Monday. After all, we said Beis Din sits on Mondays and Thursdays. So why is Sunday not an option for consummating the marriage? The answer is Shoktu Chachamim al Tokanos B'nais Yisrael. Shoktu is an expression which indicates the Chachamim focused their attention and insight and established a ruling. And what was their focus on? For the benefit of Jewish girls, we want the husband to prepare a nice feast. So he should be involved with setting up a festive meal for 3 days. That is the amount of time that's needed for making a truly festive meal. And what are the 3 days? Echad b'Shabbos, v'sheni b'Shabbos, v'shlishi b'Shabbos. On Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. 3 days for preparing a meal in honor of their nisuin. Uborvi konsa, and on Wednesday he actually takes her in. They stand under the marriage canopy and have intimacy. V'achshav shishaninu shoktu, and now that we've introduced this idea of shokdu chachomim, namely the chachomim establishing the need for a proper festive wedding meal, that which we've learned, that if the year ended, means the time arrived, it means a year ended, and they have not as yet consummated their marriage, so he is obligated to support her anyway. And if she's marrying a Kohen, so she's obligated to receive truma. Now that we've introduced the shoktu idea, this particular halacha, higiyazman be'echad b'Shabbos, if the year ends on a Sunday, mitoch sheinu yochol lichnos eino ma'ale lo mazonos, since he can't take her in, because if the year ends on a Sunday, obviously he wasn't using Shabbos to prepare a festive wedding meal, so we don't have the 3 consecutive preparation days for the meal if the marriage will take place on a Sunday. Now, since the year ends on Echad b'Shabbos, and he can't marry her on Echad b'Shabbos on Sunday because of the shoktu consideration, Eino male lo mazono, so he's not obligated to start funding her on that particular Sunday. Lefikach chola hu o shechol sahi. Therefore, if he took ill, or she took ill, o shepir sonida, or she became a menstruant on the day that the year finished, Eino male lo mizonos. He does not have to support her. He doesn't have to offer her food, which is basically support her. Now, why is that? Because though the year ended, he couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't take her in on that Sunday. The first opportunity for him to take her in would be from that Wednesday. So from that point on, then he would be obligated to support her. But those interim days between the end of the year and his first opportunity to actually be able to marry her, during those interim days, he's not obligated to support her. Before we go on, notice the markings. You notice diamonds with an aleph and a beis that appear. On the side of the Gemara, under the Nosei Mivneh heading, we have an aleph and beis in diamonds, Shnei Lishonos. These are two versions, Be'inyan, regarding Mahadin Legabi Choivas Habal Lozun Arusoso. What is the law regarding a husband and his obligation to support his wife? Im bigia siyum hayud beis chodesh, if with the arrival or the completion of 12 months, on the day that the 12 months complete, hisrachish oines, something beyond his control arose, shemonea mimenu lachnisa, that prevents him from taking her in, from consummating the marriage. What is included in this? 1, chola hu, where he became ill. Number 2, chol sahi, or she became infirmed. Or number 3, pirsa nida, shelo b'shas vesta, or she all of a sudden becomes menstruant at a time that's unexpected. In other words, when that year mark came, she became a nida at a time that she ordinarily would not have expected it to appear, to arise. So we go back to our Gemara. We noted that there is a rule, and we're just repeating ourselves, that after a year goes by, a husband who hasn't yet consummated his marriage with his wife is obligated to support her. If that year mark falls out on a Sunday, since he can't take her in because of the rabbinic rule that one has to wait till Wednesday, we said higiazman be'echad b'Shabbos mitoch sheni yochel lichnos eino male lo mazonos. Since he can't take her in, he has to wait till Wednesday. He doesn't have to support her from that end of calendar year mark till Wednesday. Lefikach cholahu o shechol sahi o shepir sanida. Therefore, if he became ill, or she took ill, or she became a nida, eino male la mazonos. If that year mark comes and something beyond his control arose that prevents him from consummating the marriage, so he is not obligated to support her. There's a Rashi, Lefikach, Rav Yosef Misayim Bo Mishmei Denafshe. You'll notice that our long Rav Yosef marking ends over here. As Rashi says, this is the end of Rav Yosef's presentation that he's saying on his own. The Omar Lefikach Hayil v'lomanu shema ukav machmas oines eino chayav lozuna. Since we have learned that someone who is prevented from consummating the marriage because of something beyond his control, the year mark ending, and yet Wednesday hasn't yet arrived, that's beyond his control. So he does not have to support her. Therefore, cholahu or chol sahi, other cases of things that transpire that are beyond his control. So with the year mark ending, but at that point something beyond his control arose, he does not have to support her immediately. Now we have a bracketed section. This is a long section. Take note of the length of this bracketed section. It takes you down about a third of the way down Omid Beis. On the side of the Gemara, we have a starred note, Tam HaSograyim, the reason for the brackets. Divrei Rava, Shemofim Achrei HaSograyim, the words of Rava. Rava appears after the bracketed section. Hamshich Yoshir Mima Shenema Kan Lefikoch. They are a continuation of that which we've just said now with our Lefikoch conclusion, so that if you skip the brackets, then Rava's comment will flow smoothly. The Mishum Oines, our Lefikoch comment now, the conclusion that we just reached in the Gemara, states that because of ones, something beyond one's control, ein tzorech lozuna, he does not have to support her. If the inability of his consummating the marriage with her is a result of an oines, something beyond his control, he doesn't have to support her. Daha denenas nechshav bosis letaino letoivas abal. The phenomena that we mentioned, these ones circumstances, work out to be something to the benefit of the husband. He does not have to support her. The idea of an onus, of something beyond his control that arises working to the benefit of the husband, is something that we will find does not work out, does not function in the same way when it comes to the realm of divorce. And you'll notice the diamond Rava after the bracketed section, where the Gemara says, Omar Rava Luinin Gittin Eino Kain. Regarding matters of divorce, this is not the case. In other words, the idea of onus working to the husband's benefit, to a fulfillment of the husband's for his benefit, that's not the case when it comes to Gittin. And if we skip momentarily to the Rashi on this point, 4 lines from the top of the Rashi column on Omid Beis, U'le'inyin Gittin Eino Kain. Notice how Rashi is so sensitive to the structure. He says, Alafikoch Koi. The comment made regarding divorce documents is going on the conclusion that we reached with the word Lefikoch here back on Omid Aleph. The Ashmeinin she Akovas Ha'oines Potroso Min Amazonos, that which we concluded on Omid Aleph, that because of something beyond his control, that enables him to withhold the Mazonos support. The Inyan Gittin Ein Tainus Oines Moeles. Regarding divorces, the claim that something is beyond his control does not benefit his claim. Im nosan get liishto, if a man gave a divorce document to his wife almanas, im lo ovoy ad zman ploni yehi get, and he says that if I don't show up by such and such a time, then this divorce should take hold. V'nenas v'lobo, and something beyond his control prevented him from coming. He wanted to come. He wanted to stop the get from being effective. But something came up, preventing him from coming within that time that he stipulated. Harei ze get. V'eino yochol lomar onus hoyisi. The get goes through, and he, the husband, cannot claim, oh, I was prevented from coming beyond my control. So we see that the kind of oines benefits the husband in the case of the need to support her, but the taina of onus, the claim of onus, does not benefit him in the realm of divorce. So now that we've hopefully laid out the Gemara structurally, we turn our attention to the section within the brackets. V'ika deboy lo. We're back on Omid Aleph, toward the bottom of the page. You notice where the bracketed section begins. V'ika deboy lo mibaya. Notice the squiggle underline, as we indicated earlier today. This introduces something that is of an alternative nature. So there are those that present this issue in a question form. Notice we have a long question marking. Cholahu mahu. Let us say the 12-month period between the Erisin and the Nisuin arrived, and he took ill at that point. Does he have to support her? He hasam taimomai. There, in the case of the year ending on a Sunday, we said he does not have to support her. Mishum da'onis. Why doesn't he have to support her? Because it's beyond his control. In other words, the year ends on a Sunday, but he can't take her in because of the takonas chachamim, of having 3 days of investment in the meal. V'hachanami ha'onis. And here too, he took ill, so he wouldn't have to support her because of the oinus circumstances. Oh, Dilma. Asam onis b'takanta tatinu le'rabonan. There, in the case of the year ending on a Sunday, and his inability to take her in was because something imposed upon him by a rabbinic ruling that you can't marry until you invest 3 days in preparing a big festive meal. Hacha lo. Here, in the case of his taking ill, you don't have a takona of the chachamim imposed on him. V'imtim selomar. And if you say cholahu male lo mezonos, if he took ill, since it's not a takonas chachamim, so if he took ill, so he still is obligated to support her. After all, the problem is coming from him, from his side of things, so he has to support her. What about cholsa hi mahu? Let us say that the year mark ended, and on the day that the year ended, she took ill. What is the din then? And there are two sides, and we label this Aleph Odilmo Beis. Motzi Omar law. Can the husband say, Ha koimno? Here I am. I'm standing here. I'm ready to take you in. You're not coming to me because you're ill, but I'm ready to take you in. Odilmo matzia omrole, or possibly she has a claim against him, saying nistachva sodeu, that it's basically, without a literal translation, it's your tough luck. It's your tough luck that I've become ill and I can't be taken in to consummate the marriage right now, but the year has ended. If we take a look at Rashi toward the end of the page, nistachva sodeu loshen motor sochev, it's an expression like a rainstorm that washes things away. Nishtafa sadcha, klomar mazal chagaram mehayom ani mutelos alecholozim. It's your bad luck, your mazal, that caused me to be sick, and it's not something that I am responsible for. It's your bad mazal, and therefore it's obligatory upon you to support me. We continue in the Gemara. V'imtim salomar omro le'nesaho sadeu. And if you say that she has a claim against him in order to thereby demand her mazonos, because she can claim it's your bad luck that made me get sick. Pirsa nida mahu. Let us say that as the year ends, she becomes a nida. And at this point, he can't consummate the marriage because there's a Torah prohibition of living together, of cohabiting with a nida. So let's say she became a nida at the end of the year. There's a internal angular brackets that you can see, just lasting to the second line from the top of Omid Beis, and the note on the side says Ikra She'ela Mofia acharei hasograim. The main question will appear after the bracketed section. V'soch hasograim, a Gemara meres ma eino sheila. Within this bracketed section, the Gemara will be telling us what is not a question. So if we skip the brackets momentarily, the issue came up of what happens if she becomes a nidah. And after the brackets on the second line from the top, the Gemara says shelo b'shas vesta. It's a menstruant sighting that's not at her vesta. Vesta means her expected time. Many women, as far as the Talmud is concerned, have fixed cycles for their nidus, for their menstruation. It can happen that she becomes a nidah not at the fixed time. So the Gemara now, let's read within the bracketed section. B'shas vesta loti bayaloch. As far as the year ending, and it ends at a time when she normally has a female monthly blood appearance. That's called shas vesta. The lo matzia omrale. She cannot say to him nistachva sadeu, that it's your bad luck, because it's not a function of his luck when she becomes a nidah at her expected time. Shelo b'shas vesta mai. The question is, let's say she becomes a nidah at an unexpected time. Shelo b'shas vesta. Vesta means her fixed cycle, and this is shelo b'shas vesta, not at the fixed cycle. Mai. So the year ends at a time that she ordinarily does not experience a nidah sighting. Two sides of the question. Kevon dolo b'shas vesta havya, since it's at an unusual time. Matzia omrale, she can say to him nistachva sadeu, it's your bad luck that caused me to experience blood at a time that's unusual for me. And if she can claim nistachva sadeu, she can say it's your tough luck, so then he is obligated to support her. Oy dilma. Or possibly, since there are women that experience cycle changes, in other words, where one cycle is replaced by a new cycle, kishas vesta damya. It would be like her, halachically speaking, it would be considered like her expected time. And as we said before, in the internal angular brackets, if the nidus comes about at the end of a year at an expected time, so she cannot say to him, it's your bad luck that brought this on. This is the way she developed even before a husband ever showed up. So the question was now asked, let's say she becomes a nidah at the end of 12 months, and that appearance at the end of 12 months was something that was out of the blue, was unexpected. The Gemara answers, Poshit Rav Achoy. Rav Achoy responds, tries to solve the question from the following. Higiaz man v'lo nisu, oichlos mishelo, v'oichlos betruma. The source we saw on Omid Aleph, if the time for consummating the marriage arrives, a year is over, and v'lo nisu, and he did not marry her, he didn't take her in. V'lo nisu is an expression that we're going to have to pay close attention to later in the Gemara, grammatically speaking. V'lo nisu would imply that she did not become married. Ochlos mishelo v'ochlos betruma. She is entitled to be supported. Lo nosu lo kotani. In this source, it doesn't say that the non-consummation was because of the husband. Here we're dealing with grammar. Lo nosu would be a focus on the man taking her in, or in this case, not taking her in. He was the initiator. But it doesn't say that. Lo nisu. It speaks about the women not allowing themselves to be married. In In other words, the restraining factor here is on the woman's side. Hefidami, what's the case? What's a practical illustration of this point? If the woman is initiating the hesitation or the resistance to getting married, why would the source say that they eat from the husband? The husband has to support her, and they can eat truma. After all, she is the one preventing the marriage from being consummated. So if that were the circumstance, the halacha that she has to be provided for doesn't make sense. Elo lav the isnis ki hai gavna. Rather, the source that speaks about hiyazma v'lo nisu is talking about a case of infirmment, of one taking ill, and other we'll say ones factors. So the grammar indicates that there was an onus. Elolav the isnis ki hai gavna. It must be that an onus like this, where infirmity set in, or her becoming a nida set in. Vikotani, and it says oichlos mishalova ochlos betruma. He is to support her. So, at this point, by focusing on the grammar, the Gemara would be answering the question. The question had been, the year ends and she becomes a nida. Is he expected to support her? The answer is, yes, he's expected to support her, because the source said the lo nisu, a year went by and she had not married yet, she hadn't consummated the marriage, the husband has to support her. What stopped the marriage from being consummated? So it must be something like this, with her becoming a nida. Here you have a rejection. It lasts a couple of lines. Omar Rav Ashi, La'olam e malach kol oinsa loy achla. Any kind of ones circumstance that would prevent them from consummating the marriage, that is reason enough for her not to be able to receive support from the husband. So if there's any kind of onus that comes up, she is not entitled to demand support from him. Udakoma akvi inhu. And the source above is speaking about a case where let me go say this again. If as a result of an onus, he does not have to support her, then why in the source above does it say that if a year lapsed, he has to support her? And Rav Ashi explains, because in the source it's talking about a case of the husband resisting consummating the marriage. Well, if he's initiating this resistance, he had better support her. Ubedinhu di boyale lemisni lo nosu. Grammatically, the source should have reflected that he was the one preventing the consummation of the marriage. So why didn't the source use a form of speech that would indicate he initiated the resistance to consummation? The idea of tona reisha b'diti, since the reisha focused on the woman, the reisha of the Mishnah spoke about noisin lebesula yud beis chodesh, that we give the virgin 12 months to get married. In other words, this is the reisha of the source where we read above Higiyaz man v'lo nisu. The reisha, the beginning of that source, was focused on the woman, where, as we said, it said that we give a virgin 12 months for her to get herself ready for marriage. So since the reisha was feminine focused, Tona Nami Seifa B'diti, the expression in the Seifa also was focusing on the woman, namely Lo Nisu, where she did not allow herself to get married. But in reality, what the Seifa is describing is where the husband is the one who is responsible for their not getting married. So as far as Rav Ashi is concerned, if there was an oines, something beyond their control, so he would not be obligated to support her. However, if he initiates the non-marriage, well, a year's gone by, why aren't you taking her in? So whatever your reason is, you've got to support her. Omar Rava u'le'inyan gittin eino kain. As we saw earlier regarding gittin, this idea of the husband being able to benefit from ones circumstances is not true with regard to gittin. On the side, we have a nosei mivne heading, where you can see a diamond appears, which you'll see is used to highlight Rava, and the double underline represents Shtei Lishonos Barava. Loshen 1, Roman numeral number 1, Ein Oines Begitin. I mean, Ein Oines Mevatel Aget. The taina of Ones will not be a strong enough claim to obliterate or void the divorce from setting in. You'll notice, if you have Daf Gimel Amud Aleph available, Rava appears again in a diamond with a Roman numeral number 2, where he says, V'chein le'inyan gittin. Just like Oines we saw was a factor that stopped enabled the husband to withhold support. So too by gittin, the ones circumstances will enable the get, the divorce, that will enable it from setting in, from taking effect. So our sugya, as we see, is focused on the issue of ones, uncontrollable circumstances, or circumstances beyond one's control. What role do they have with regard to divorces? So now the Gemara, Omar Rava u'le'inyan gittin eino kain, regarding divorce documents and their effectiveness, we don't say the same thing. Well, by claiming we don't say the same thing, Alma Kosova Rava, therefore Rava holds Ein Oines Begittin. The taina, the claim of ones, does not play a role with regard to divorces. Now, just to repeat ourselves, ones did play a role with regard to enabling the husband from withholding the support. The situation with gittin, the oines is not the same. Mino lei l'Rava. From where does Rava know this? So here we have some more structural points. A house marking with a number 1 appears, and on the side of the Gemara, the house introduces Nisyones Limtso Mokor L'Divrei Rava, attempts to find a source for Rava's teaching. Triangles will appear, and they represent a ma'akav, an attempt on our part to keep track of the back and forth of the Gemara, and hence with the point facing up, that represents a nisayon, an attempt, and the inverted represents a dechia, a rejection. Let us take a look at Rashi, that we'll see in the upper part of the narrow lines. Almo kosovar ein oines begittin. Ein tainus oines begittin. The claim of ones will not figure in preventing a get, a divorce, from going through. We could now, in the Gemara, we asked the question, Mino lei l'Rava. From where does Rava know this? We mentioned the house is an attempt to find a source for it. If you think it's from the following, a man says to his wife, take this divorce document, and he stipulates, this will be your divorce if I don't come from now until 12 months. He dies within the 12 months. Well, he dies within the 12 months. You see, he's not going to be coming back. Did he intend to come back within the 12 months? Yeah, he may very well have intended to come back within the 12 months. But he didn't, because of death. Eino get. The divorce doesn't go through. But here we must infer Mace hu the eino get. The case of his dying is such that the get doesn't go through because of a concept of ein get li'achar misa. You can't have a dead man divorcing his wife. Ha-chala, however, had he taken ill, he's still alive, he had taken ill. And as a result of the illness, he didn't come within the 12 months. He may very well have intended to come within the 12 months, but he took ill and was unable to. We infer harei ze get. Only in the case of death do we say it's not a get, but if he had taken ill and didn't show up, it would be a get. What does this show us? It says even though he intended for it not to be a get, he intended to come back, but because of ones circumstances he was unable to come, the get goes through, it becomes effective. So what do we see from this? We see ein ones begitten, the claim of ones, the claim of something beyond one's control, does not play a role. The Gemara rejects this. V'dilma li'olam ei moloch, I might very well tell you chala nami eino get, that his taking ill is also, just like the source said with his dying, the get is not a get, his taking ill also is reason enough for the get to be halted. As far as the source featuring death, it's not there for inference purposes. The gufo komashmon, the purpose of the source was to tell me that very point itself, the ein get la'achar misa, was to reveal to us that a divorce that's going to set in after the husband dies is not considered a divorce. And by the way, just bear in mind, in general, when we say a woman is divorced or not divorced, right now the guy's dead, the husband's dead, she's not a married woman anymore. Does it matter for what reason? Yes, it does. If we say that she is considered divorced, so then she will not be obligated, if the husband died leaving no children, she would not be obligated in the yibum marriage, the levirate marriage. However, if you say that she's not considered divorced, she's considered rather a widow, an almana, she will be obligated in yibum. So at this point, it could very well be that not only does death serve as reason for it to be not a get, but his taking ill is also reason for preventing the get, indicating that there is oines begitten. The Gemara questions this, though, responds, ein get la'achar misa, if the purpose of the above source was to teach me that point, that ein get la'achar misa ha'tana le'reisha, that's a point that's already taught at the beginning of that Tanaic source, in which it says, harei ze giteich im mesi, a man who is very ill, he's deathly ill, says to his wife, this is your divorce if I die. Harei ze giteich mecholi zeh, this is my divorce, I'm divorcing you. And as we said before, by divorcing her, he saves her the trouble of dealing with the yavam, the levirate marriage, where he says this expression, harei ze giteich mecholi zeh, let this be your divorce from after this illness. In other words, it's type of expression where he's saying that after he dies, so you be divorced. Harei ze giteich li'achar misa, he says, let this be your divorce document after I die. Lo omar klum. Such a divorce is meaningless. She is not, it's an ineffective divorce. And the fact that he dies won't spare her from yibum. She'll be considered an almona. So the point is then that to claim that the source above was teaching me ein get li'achar misa, that is spelled out over here. Therefore, the source above that spoke about mace, eino get, must be for the inference purpose, which would then say that if he took ill, it would be a get. Then, in fact, serving as a source for ein oines begitten. The Gemara, though, responds, rejects that. It says Dilma, maybe the purpose of the Seifa is lafuke midrabosenu. Maybe the Reisha and the Seifa are really focused on the issue of ain't get the achar misa. You'll ask them, why does the Seifa have to repeat that point? The Seifa has another agenda. It's to the exclusion of the opinion of Rabosenu. Who's the Rabosenu? The Sanya. The Rabosenu hitirua linose. There's another school of thought where a person writes a divorce document and he says, this is your get if I don't come within 12 months, and he dies. The Rabosenu hold that she is considered divorce. This loshon hitiruli nose means they enable her to marry with a stranger without the need for chalitza, for release from the yavam. Why doesn't she need a release from the yavam according to the Rabosenu? Because she is considered divorced. How is she considered divorced? After all, he died. The Amrinon, and we explain man Rabosenu, who is behind this title Rabosenu. Omar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel Beidino Deshoru Mashcha. It's the opinion. This isn't direct. One thing isn't related to it, but it's the opinion of that Beis Din, of that court, that allowed us to benefit from Gentile produced oil. There's a halacha that we cannot benefit from Gentile produced wine. The issue of oil was also subject to discussion, but a Beis Din, a court, came along and said oil is allowed. And that Beis Din, the Sharu Mashcha Savri Law Rabbi Yossi, they hold like the opinion of Rabbi Yossi with regard to documents. The Omar Zmanu Shel Shtar Mochiach Halav. The date that is written in the document proves what the author's real intention was. So that if you have a man that wrote a divorce document and stipulated, as we saw above, and he wrote today's date in it, as far as Rabbi Yossi's opinion is concerned, from the time or from the date written in the document, that's when the document takes effect. We here are coming along in the source that was introduced with the house marking of Hareza Gitechim Lo Bosi Mikan Hashem As Chodesh, and in that source we're coming to deny or counter this school of thought that said Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Halav, and we come and say no. If a person said the divorce should be a divorce if I don't come within 12 months, and he happened to die during the 12 months, the get is not a get. According to Rabbi Yossi, it would have been a good get because he wrote a date in the shtar, and the fact that a person bothers writing a date in the document, according to Rabbi Yossi, shows that it's from that point that he wants it to be effective. And according to Rabbi Yossi, it's not a problem of ein get the achar misa of a dead man divorcing, because when the document was written with the date in it, he was still alive. So, just to repeat the main point, the first source which was introduced with a house marking, which we thought would be the support for Rav, or the basis of Rav, of ein ones begitten through an inference in the way we read the source, forget about it. The source was not to be read with inference purposes, but rather the Reisha and the Seifa were dealing with the concept of ein get li'achar misa. And you'll ask, why was repetition needed? Because one of those installments was needed to counter the opinion of Rabbi Yossi that said Zmana Shel Shtar Mochiach Halav. So we're left with the question, though, from where does Rava know ein ones begitten? V'ela mi Seifa, from the end of the Tanaic source, which reads, a person writes a get, and he says, this is your get, and he stipulates, me'achshov im lo bosi mikan vi'ad yud beis chodesh. It's you're to be divorced from now up till 12 months if I don't come within the 12 months. Umeis b'soich shnei moser chodesh harei get, and he dies within the 12 months, the get goes through. It becomes a get. Now, Rashi says in the lines under the third line under the Gemara text, Hareze get v'afagav the ein oines godol mimi. So even though there's no greater form of ones than death, almo ein ones begitten. You see that the claim of ones doesn't apply with regard to withholding, preventing a divorce from going through. Just like his death doesn't prevent the get from taking hold, and it does take hold, so too if he took ill. And that's the reason he didn't show up. Too bad. The get goes through. So we continue reading in the Gemara. Mace v'hu adin l'chola. Just like we saw in the Rashi, his dying doesn't prevent the get from going through, and likewise with his taking ill, and that's why he didn't show up. 12 months went by as he stipulated, and he did not show up. The get goes through. The Gemara asks, Dilma Mace Dafka, maybe as far as this source is concerned, it's only when he dies that we say that the get goes through. Delo nicha lay the tepel kami yavam. The husband he wanted to prevent her, he wanted to help her out from having to deal with the yavam, and only if she becomes a widow, that means he dies, would she not have to deal with the yavam. Let us just restate that. Dilmo meis dafka. Let's look at Rashi. Dilmo meis dafka dechol atzmo shekosav lo get machmas kein kosav lo. Maybe his whole purpose in writing the get was to prevent her from dealing with the yavam. Shim yomus ye get lemafreya. That if he dies, and that's the reason for his not showing up within the 12 months, the get will set in retroactively. Shelo tiskak liyavam ubahai oinsa lo nicho le lemiftal gita, and with specifically this onus of his dying, he doesn't want the get to be stopped. He wants the get to go through, because otherwise she'll be considered a widow, and a widow has to marry the yavam. Avol ba'oinsa achrina the nicho le livtule gita be, but some other kind of onus, some other circumstance that came up that prevented him from showing up. Well, he wanted to show up. He wanted to stop the get from going through. I would claim that then the onus is a reason for preventing the get from taking hold. So from this source, we can't say that just like death is an example of an onus, so too the case of his taking ill. Ella, number 3, Mehah. From the following, we're going to try to show Ein Ones Begitten. Dahudi Amar Lahu, there was a married man that said, if I don't come back to this place within 30 days, then the get that I'm giving now should be a good get. Also, Besof Talsin Yomin, we see the man coming in the distance at the end of 30 days, but he's Upaske Mavra, he's prevented by arriving to us literally because of a river that separated him from the town where he was supposed to arrive, and he couldn't cross the river. Omar lahu, and he screams from the other side of the river, Chazu dasoi, Chazu dasoi. Do you see? I've come. Don't you see? I've come. So we see that he's fully interested in arriving and stopping the get from taking hold. Omar Shmuel lav shmei masya, and Shmuel says, too bad, you didn't actually come back here. You're stuck on the other side of the river. It's not considered an arrival. And the get is a good get. The get goes through. She is considered divorced. So what do we see from here? That even though he was prevented because of circumstances beyond his control from arriving, it doesn't matter. The get goes through. The Gemara says this is not a good source. Shmuel's ruling is not a good source for Rava. It could be that common circumstances that prevent people, those are different. It's not considered beyond your control. The kivan, the aboyale lasnu, is something that is common. It's common that ferries aren't traveling at all hours of the day, and you should have known ahead of time. Look, there was a river between the town that you said you were going to return to and where you were. You should have stipulated this, and you didn't bother stipulating it. That's, again, shiny. This is shiny. The kiva the boyale list. You should have stipulated velo asni, and you didn't stipulate that. Ihu de afsida nafshe. You caused your own loss. In other words, you have to suffer the consequences. But if it were a real ones, so that might, yes, prevent the get from going through. So where does Rava have a basis for saying ein oines begitin? Elo Rava svara de nafshe ka'omar. Rather, Rava has his own reason for concluding that. In other words, it's not based on a Tanaic source, it's not based on some early Amoraic ruling, but rather it's his own thinking. And his own thinking is Mishum Tsnuos or Mishum Prutzos. This has to do with women that are exceptionally modest, or women that are the opposite. They are luid, they are Prutzos. And here the Gemara explains these 2 points. Mishum Tsnuos, we say that we establish a principle ein oines begitten because of the Tsnuos. The amris lo lehevegita, if you were to say that the oines does have the ability to cancel a get, we continue at the top of Gimel Amar Aleph. Zimnin de lo onis. It could be that a person doesn't show up because he chose not to show up. He wasn't ones. His lack of showing up was not because of uncontrollable circumstances. And it's a real get. She's really divorced. V'sovra, and his wife thinks that his non-show up is his no-show, de'onis, that it was because of circumstances beyond his control. And if we were to say that an ones can cancel a get, she feels she's still married. Ume'agna v'yosfa, and she will withhold herself. Me'agna is to remain in a state of non-marriage. She'll withhold herself from marrying someone else, v'yosfa, and continue sitting thinking that she's married to this guy that didn't show up. But now that we say, even if his no-show is because of ones, doesn't matter. The get's a get under all circumstances. Whether it's his will, whether it was ones, she is divorced. So then she won't have any thinking on her. She won't think to withhold from seeking out a new mate. She is divorced. Umishum prutzos, and because of the other extreme women who are extremely luid, Di'i amris lo leheve gita. If you were to say that the onus can actually stop a get from going through, zimnin donis, it might be that his no-show was really because of an onus. And if you say yesh onus begitin, she's still considered married. V'yomra lo onus, he's a no-show. Why is he a no-show? Well, he didn't want to come. It wasn't an onus. He deliberately did not come. And if that were in fact the reality, so she would be divorced. V'yazlo minsava, and she'll go and marry someone else. V'nimsa get botel, and if you were to say that the onus does prevent the get from going through, and in fact he was an onus, so the get that she thinks was a divorce is not a divorce, it's botel uboneh mamzerim, and her children are, in a second marriage, are illegitimate children. The Gemara now asks, Umi komidi de midoraisa lo haveget. Is there anything that on a Torah level is not a divorce? In other words, according to what we're saying now, Rava says because of a gezerah, because of a rabbinic ruling, the oines is not going to prevent the get from going through. The get will go through. But on a Torah level, the oines should have prevented the get from going through. So the question is there something that on a Torah level, the get would be cancelled? Umishum snuos, umishum prutzos, sharino neishes ishlama. And because of the consideration we just finished explaining, the prutzos and the tsnuos, we will say the get is a get under all circumstances, and we're releasing a, technically speaking, married woman to marry someone else. Could that be? Just to reiterate, something on a Torah level, she's considered still married, and the rabbis come along and say, no, she's not married. The Gemara says, and by the way, there's a Rashi we should take a look at. The Midoraisa lo havigita. Shemotzinu, Rashi on the fourth line from the top, Shemotzinu tainis oines minator. We find that an ones has meaning, has strength, that it's a major consideration. Shenemar, Ulanaro Sosadover. If there was a woman that was betrothed and she was being raped, so even though she's a married woman cohabiting with someone else, but it's because of rape, so we don't do anything to her. She's not guilty of anything. And what's the saving factor? The fact that she is an ones. So we see that ones is a consideration. So that if ones is a consideration, here we have a fellow that wanted to come back, and because of ones he didn't come back. So that's a consideration to prevent the get from going through. So can you have something that on a Torah level, she's not really divorced, and because of a rabbinic consideration she's considered released? The Gemara says, that is true. Kol de mekadesh, adaita de rabbanan mekadesh. Women who get married accepting all the rules that the rabbis established in laws of marriage. V'afkinu rabbanan lekidushe minei. Part of the rules of marriage states that in the event of divorce is part and parcel of the rules of marriage. Marriage is the entrance, divorce is the exit. So the Rabbanan established, they said that let it be known that a divorce whose conditions are not met because of uncontrollable circumstances, the uncontrollable circumstances play no role and the divorce goes through. So when a woman initially got married, she got married with that acceptance, with that understanding. And in a case of a divorce document whose conditions couldn't be met because of ones, that means that the Rabbanan move in and say that the initial marriage was never a marriage. They can undo things retroactively. Why? Because the initial marriage was accepted was taken upon themselves and was entered through accepting the rules and conditions of the Rabbanan. Omar le Ravino le Ravashi Teinach Kodesh Bekaspa. I can understand a retroactive undoing when the initial marriage was done through money, where a man offered woman money in exchange for her acceptance of marriage. And the Rabbanan come and say that when circumstances like this arise, the money that you were given initially wasn't marriage money, it was money simply given to you as a gift, but it had no marriage connotation. So the true money was physically exchanged, but we can redefine what the money was. It wasn't marriage money, but rather it was a gift. Kodesh Babio Michael Ameimar. What about a marriage that's entered through one of the other three methods of entrance to marriage, and that's through cohabitation, Bia? The Mishnah at the beginning of Maseches Kedushin says that a woman can be acquired through three methods. One is through money, and the other is through intimacy. What are you going to say about that, where the initial contact between this man and woman was through intimacy, thereby establishing their Kedushin? How can that be undone? The Gemara says, Shavu Rabbanan lebiloso, bilaznus. The Rabbanan can redefine that act of intimacy not as an act of marriage, but an act of harlotry. So that too can be redefined. Hence, there was no marriage from the very outset. So that if a man gave a divorce document to a woman and stipulated some stipulation and it couldn't be met because of ones circumstances, the Rabbanan say, we want you to know something. This woman is divorced. She's divorced. Why? Because in effect, and this is a halachic analysis, in effect she was never really married. As you can see, the Gemara has a second lashon in presenting Rava, and Amir Tzashem in our next shir we will see this alternative approach. Before we conclude, let us remind you that if you wish to be in touch with us in order to access marked Gemaras, we can be reached at gmarkings@gmail.com. With that, we conclude our shiur for today.